The sound came from inside the wall. Not a tap, not a creak, a knock, deliberate, rhythmic, 3 times. Captain Derek Hale froze in the middle of the gutted apartment, his gloved hand still pressed against the charred drywall. Around him, the cleanup crew continued their work, scraping, hauling, documenting. The air was thick with the smell of burnt plastic and scorched wood, an acrid mixture that clung to the back of the throat and refused to let go. The fire had been out for 2 days. The building was cleared. The reports were filed. Everyone had moved on. Everyone except Blaze. The German shepherd stood rigid at the far corner of the living room, ears pinned forward, hackles raised along his spine like a ridge of dark fur. His mouth was open, panting hard, breath coming in short, rapid bursts that clouded in the cool morning air. But his eyes, those amber eyes that had seen so much, that had guided Derek through smoke and flame and darkness, were locked on the wall. He wasn't barking anymore. He was listening. Derek's pulse quickened. He'd been a firefighter for 11 years. He'd walked through dozens of burn sites, felt the weight of collapsed ceilings, heard the groan of buckling steel, witnessed the aftermath of destruction that fire leaves in its wake. He knew the sounds a building made when it settled, the creak of cooling metal, the pop of stressed lumber, the whisper of ash falling like black snow. This wasn't that. This was something else. Something that made his skin prickle and his instincts scream. He glanced at his lieutenant, who was signing off on a form near the door, his pen scratching against the clipboard with mechanical precision. No one else had heard it. No one else was looking. They were all focused on their tasks, their procedures, their protocols. Derek turned back to the wall, and then Blaze barked, sharp, urgent, relentless. The sound echoed through the hollow apartment, bouncing off the scorched walls and empty door frames. It wasn't his alert bark. It wasn't his search bark. It was something Derek had never heard before, something primal and desperate. But what he uncovered wasn't a threat. It was a life. The apartment building stood in the heart of Portland's industrial district, a 5-story brick structure that had been erected in 1947, when post-war housing was being thrown up as quickly as concrete could set. It was home to low-income families, college students drowning in debt, and a handful of artists who couldn't afford anywhere else. The kind of building that appeared in city reports about housing violations, but never quite made it to the top of the repair list. The fire had started on the 3rd floor in Unit 3C, occupied by a single mother named Maria Ortega and her 2 young children, Carlos, 8, and Sofia, 5. Faulty wiring, the initial report said. An electrical short in the kitchen wall that had smoldered for hours before, finally igniting the insulation. By the time the smoke detectors went off, the fire had already consumed half the apartment. The hallway had filled with toxic smoke within minutes. The stairwell had become a chimney, drawing the flames upward with terrifying speed. Derek had been on the scene that night. He remembered pulling up in Engine 47, the orange glow visible 3 blocks away, painting the underside of the clouds with hellish light. He remembered the smoke pouring from the 3rd floor windows, thick and black, rolling out in great billowing waves. He remembered the heat, the kind that distorts the air, that makes it shimmer and dance, that pushes against you like a physical force. He remembered Maria Ortega on the sidewalk, her face streaked with soot and tears, clutching her children to her chest. Carlos had been crying, his small body shaking with sobs. Sofia had been silent, her eyes wide and glassy with shock. The paramedics had checked them over. Minor smoke inhalation, some superficial burns on Maria's hands where she'd grabbed the door handle, but they were alive. They were safe. Everyone accounted for, the incident commander had said over the radio. All residents evacuated. No fatalities. Derek remembered the relief in everyone's eyes when those words came through. The collective exhale, the loosening of shoulders. Another fire, another save, another night where they'd beaten the odds. 2 days later, Derek was back. This time it was daylight. The smoke had cleared, leaving behind only the acrid smell that would take weeks to fade. The ash had settled in drifts against the baseboards and windowsills. The walls were black with soot, the ceiling sagging in places where the heat had warped the structure, leaving it vulnerable and weak. The cleanup crew moved through the space like surgeons in an operating room, cataloging what could be salvaged, marking what needed to be torn down, photographing everything for insurance purposes and legal documentation. Derek wasn't supposed to be here. His shift had ended at 6 that morning, after a grueling 24 hours on duty. He should have been home, showering off the smell of smoke, crawling into bed, letting sleep pull him under. But when Captain Williams had asked for a volunteer to accompany the building inspector, someone who knew the layout, who'd been inside during the blaze, who could answer questions about structural integrity and fire progression, Derek had raised his hand, and he'd brought Blaze. The dog had been with him for 3 years now. A rescue from a shelter in Eugene, 2 hours south, originally trained for search and rescue work with a K-9 unit in Seattle, but retired after an injury to his hind leg, a torn ACL that had healed but left him with a slight limp, enough to disqualify him from the rigorous physical demands of urban search and rescue. Derek had adopted him on a whim, or what he told himself was a whim. The truth was, he'd seen something in the dog's eyes at the shelter. An intelligence, a determination, a refusal to quit despite the pain. Derek had thought the dog might enjoy the quieter life of a firehouse mascot. A warm bed, regular meals, the occasional pat on the head from visiting school children. But Blaze had other ideas. Within a month, he was following Derek into training drills, his nose working overtime, his body moving with purpose despite the limp. Within 6 months, he was certified for fire investigation work, specifically detecting accelerants and locating hotspots in post-fire environments. He had a nose for gasoline, for kerosene, for the chemical signatures that spoke of arson. He could find embers hidden behind walls, could alert crews to gas leaks that would have gone unnoticed until someone struck a match. Blaze had saved lives. He'd found a homeless man trapped in the basement of a burning warehouse, unconscious from smoke inhalation, but alive. He'd pinpointed the source of an arson fire to a specific apartment, leading to the arrest of a man who'd been trying to collect insurance money. He'd alerted a crew to a natural gas leak in a restaurant kitchen, preventing an explosion that would have killed dozens. He was calm under pressure, disciplined, and intuitive in ways that still surprised Derek after 3 years. Blaze seemed to understand not just commands but context. He could read a scene, assess danger, make decisions that bordered on reasoning. But today Blaze was different. He'd been restless since they'd entered the building, pacing in tight circles, sniffing the air with rapid, shallow breaths. Ignoring Derek's commands to heal, which was unusual, Blaze was almost always obedient, responding to the slightest gesture or tone. And when they'd reached the third-floor unit, Unit 3C, where the fire had started, where Maria and her children had lived, Blaze had gone straight to the far wall of the living room and begun to bark. Not the alert bark he used for accelerants, which was high-pitched and insistent, not the low growl he gave when something was structurally unstable, when a floor was about to give way or a ceiling about to collapse. This was something else, something urgent and desperate, a sound that raised the hair on Derek's arms and made his chest tighten with inexplicable dread. Derek had tried to call him off. "Blaze, heal. Come on, boy. There's nothing there." But Blaze didn't budge. He planted his feet, his body trembling with tension, and barked again, and again, and again. Now, standing in the center of the room, Derek felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. The sensation was primal, instinctive, the kind of warning that evolution had hardwired into the human nervous system. Something is wrong. The wall looked normal. Scorched, yes. The paint had bubbled and peeled away in long strips, revealing the drywall beneath. There were cracks in places, spiderwebbing out from the studs where the heat had caused the material to expand and contract. But it was intact, no visible holes, no obvious damage. Just drywall, wooden studs, and pink fiberglass insulation. And yet, the knock came again, 3 times. Slow, steady, deliberate. Derek's breath caught in his throat. "Lieutenant," he called out, his voice sharper than he intended, cutting through the ambient noise of the cleanup crew. The man by the door looked up, frowning. Lieutenant Marcus Gray was 52, with 28 years on the job, and a face that had seen too much. "What is it, Hale? I need you to hear something." Lieutenant Marcus Gray was a man of procedure. He didn't believe in gut feelings, hunches, or intuition. He believed in protocols, checklists, and evidence. He believed in the scientific method, in cause and effect, in explanations that could be written down and filed away. When Derek asked him to stop what he was doing and listen to a wall, Gray's expression didn't change. But he walked over, his boots crunching through the debris scattered across the floor. "What am I listening for?" he asked, pulling off his helmet and tucking it under one arm. His hair was gray at the temples, thinning on top, slicked back with sweat. "Just wait," Derek said, holding up a hand. They stood in silence. The cleanup crew continued their work in the adjacent rooms, the sound of a crowbar prying up floorboards, the scrape of a shovel against concrete, the rustle of plastic sheeting being unfurled. Somewhere below, a power saw whined to life, cutting through wood with a high metallic scream. The building groaned softly, settling on its foundation, a sound so common in old structures that it barely registered. And then, knock, knock, knock. Gray's eyes widened. He stepped closer to the wall, pressing his ear against the blackened surface, his breath fogging slightly in the cool air. Silence. Gray waited. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Nothing. He pulled back, frowning. "Could be plumbing," he said, his tone measured. "Pipes expanding as the temperature normalizes. Happens all the time in post-fire conditions. The heat causes metal to expand. Then as it cools, it contracts, creates all kinds of noises." "That's not plumbing," Derek said, his jaw tight. "Then what is it?" Gray asked, his voice taking on an edge. Derek didn't answer. He didn't know. But every instinct he had, every lesson learned in 11 years of walking into burning buildings, was telling him that something was wrong. Blaze barked again, louder this time, his paws scraping against the floor as if he wanted to dig through it. His claws left white scratches in the soot-covered hardwood. "Easy, boy," Derek murmured, kneeling beside the dog. He ran a hand down Blaze's back, feeling the tension in the animal's muscles, coiled tight like springs ready to release. "What do you hear?" Blaze whined. A high, anxious sound that Derek had never heard from him before. It was the sound of distress, of urgency, of something the dog couldn't communicate in any other way. Gray pulled out his flashlight, a heavy mag light that doubled as a club in a pinch, and swept it across the wall. The beam cut through the dim light, illuminating scorch marks and smoke stains. "There's no access point here," he said, tapping the wall with his knuckles. It sounded solid. "No vent, no door, no panel. This is a load-bearing wall. If there's something behind it, it's sealed in." "Could be a cavity," Derek said, standing. His knees popped, a reminder that he wasn't as young as he used to be. Old buildings like this, sometimes they have hidden spaces, crawl spaces, service shafts, places that were sealed off during renovations and forgotten. "Or it could be nothing," Gray said, but there was doubt in his voice now. He'd been in this job long enough to know that nothing was rarely just nothing. Derek thought about the fire, the way it had spread so quickly, consuming the apartment in minutes, the way the smoke had filled the stairwell before they'd even breached the door, pouring out in thick black clouds that had reduced visibility to zero. He thought about Maria Ortega and her children, sitting on the curb, wrapped in blankets provided by the Red Cross, their faces streaked with soot and tears. Everyone accounted for, the incident commander had said, but what if they'd missed something? What if in the chaos and confusion, in the rush to get people out and get water on the fire, someone had been left behind? What if someone was still here? "We need to open this wall," Derek said, his voice steady but firm. Gray stared at him. "You want to tear down a load-bearing wall based on a dog barking?" "Based on a sound," Derek corrected. "A sound that shouldn't be there. A sound that's been consistent for the last 5 minutes. Gray hesitated. He looked at the wall, then at Blaze, then at Derek. Finally, he pulled out his radio, the device crackling to life with a burst of static. "Gray to command. We've got a potential anomaly on the 3rd floor, requesting permission to investigate." The radio crackled. A pause, filled with the ambient noise of the fire station, voices in the background, the rumble of a truck engine, the distant wail of a siren. Then, what kind of anomaly? Gray glanced at Derek, his expression unreadable. "Acoustic disturbance. Possible structural cavity. Request permission to breach and inspect." Another pause. Longer this time. Derek could almost hear the wheels turning on the other end, the risk assessment, the liability calculations. "Permission granted," the voice finally said, "but keep it contained. We don't need this building coming down on your heads. And get the building inspector to sign off before you do anything major." "Copy that," Gray said. He clipped the radio back to his belt and turned to one of the crew members, a young firefighter named Torres, who was photographing the kitchen. "Torres, get the tools. Reciprocating saw, pry bar, sledgehammer, and bring the thermal camera." Torres nodded and jogged out of the apartment, his boots thudding on the floor. Gray turned back to Derek. "If this is rats," he muttered, "I'm writing you up." "It's not rats," Derek said. But even as he said it, doubt crept in. What if it was nothing? What if he was wrong? What if he was wasting everyone's time, risking structural integrity, all because a dog was having an off day? Then Blaze barked again and Derek's doubt evaporated. The thermal camera showed nothing. Torres returned with the equipment, hauling it in a heavy canvas duffel bag. He set it down with a grunt, pulling out the thermal imaging camera, a device about the size of a small tablet with a screen that displayed heat signatures in shades of red, orange, and blue. Gray took it, powering it on, waiting for it to calibrate. "Let's see what we're dealing with," he said, aiming the camera at the wall. Derek watched the screen. The wall appeared as a flat plane of blue, cool, inactive, no heat signature. The studs behind the drywall showed as slightly warmer, thin vertical lines of green, where the wood retained a bit more ambient heat than the surrounding material. But there was nothing unusual, no hotspots, no movement, no indication that anything living was behind that wall. "Nothing," Gray said, frowning. He moved the camera slowly from left to right, covering the entire section of wall. No heat signature, no movement, just cold structure. But the knocking continued, slow, steady, deliberate. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more knocks. Derek's heart was racing now. "It's there," he said. "I don't care what the camera says. Something is there." Gray lowered the camera, his expression troubled. "Heat signatures don't lie, Hale. Unless whatever's behind there is too cold to register," Derek said. "Hypothermia. If someone's been trapped for 2 days without food or water, their core temperature could have dropped enough that they're not showing on thermal." Gray's face went pale. "Jesus." He turned to Torres. "Set up a perimeter, clear this space. I want everyone out of this room except essential personnel." Torres nodded and began moving the other crew members out, ushering them into the hallway with quick, efficient gestures. Gray marked a section of drywall with chalk, outlining a 3-by-3-foot square near the floor, just to the left of where Blaze was standing. The plan was simple. Cut through the plaster, pull back the insulation, and see what was inside. If it was nothing, they'd patch it and move on. If it was something, Derek didn't want to think about if it was something. Blaze stood beside Derek, still tense, still alert. His eyes never left the wall. His tail was low, his ears flat against his head. Every line of his body screamed danger. "If this is rats," Gray muttered again, picking up the reciprocating saw, "I'm never letting you live it down." "It's not rats," Derek said, but his voice was quieter now, less certain. The first cut was clean. Gray pressed the saw blade against the drywall, squeezing the trigger. The blade bit into the material with a high metallic whine, sending up a cloud of white dust that hung in the air like smoke. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, echoing off the walls and ceiling. Gray worked quickly, cutting along the chalk line with practiced precision. Within minutes, he'd removed the outer layer of drywall, exposing the wooden studs and the yellowed insulation behind them. Nothing. Gray leaned in, shining his flashlight into the cavity between the studs. The beam illuminated cobwebs, dust, the pink fiberglass insulation that looked like cotton candy. "I don't see—" The knock came again. This time it was louder, closer, as if whatever was making the sound knew they were there, knew they were listening. Everyone froze. The cleanup crew members, who'd been ushered into the hallway, poked their heads back in, their eyes wide. Torres dropped the duffel bag, the tools inside clanging together. "It's coming from behind the studs," Torres said, his voice tight, higher than normal. "Jesus Christ, it's coming from behind the studs." Gray straightened, his jaw set. He looked at Derek, and for the first time since Derek had known him, Gray looked scared. "Cut through," he said, his voice rough. "All of it. Now." They worked faster now. Gray handed the saw to Torres, who attacked the wooden studs with renewed urgency, cutting through them one by one. The saw blade shrieked as it bit into the wood, sending up showers of sawdust that mixed with the drywall dust in the air. Derek pulled away the insulation in thick, dusty handfuls, tossing it aside, his hands shaking despite his best efforts to stay calm. The space behind the wall was narrow, maybe 18 inches deep, but it ran the length of the room, disappearing into darkness on either side. The back wall was older, made of rough-hewn planks that looked original to the building, dark with age and grime. And then Derek saw it. A shape, small, pale, pressed against the back wall, partially hidden in shadow. "Hold," he said sharply, raising a hand. Torres stopped cutting, the saw blade still spinning, whining as it slowed. Derek dropped to his knees, peering into the cavity. His heart was pounding now, a heavy, painful rhythm that made his chest ache. His breath came in short, shallow gasps. It was a hand, small, pale, the fingers curled slightly, as if reaching for something that wasn't there. "Oh my God," someone whispered behind him. Derek's stomach twisted into a knot. His vision blurred at the edges. "We need to open this all the way," he said, his voice shaking. "Now, right now." The crew moved with renewed urgency, no longer worried about procedure or protocols. Torres and another firefighter, a woman named Chen, tore away the rest of the wall in great jagged chunks. Dust filled the air, thick and choking. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the room like gunshots. And then they saw her, a girl, maybe 7 years old, maybe younger. It was hard to tell. She was curled on her side in the narrow space, her knees pulled to her chest, her face turned toward the wall. Her clothes were filthy, stained with soot and grime, and something darker that might have been blood. Her hair hung in tangled clumps around her face, matted and dull. One of her shoes was missing. Her bare foot was pale, almost blue in the dim light. She wasn't moving. "Medic!" Gray shouted into his radio, his voice cracking. "Medic to the 3rd floor, Unit 3C now, we have a victim. Repeat, we have a victim." Derek didn't wait for permission. He crawled into the cavity, his shoulders scraping against the remaining studs. The space was tight, suffocating, barely wide enough for his body. Splinters dug into his hands. The smell was overwhelming. Dust, rot, urine, and something else. Something sweet and sickly that made his stomach churn. "Hey," he said softly, his voice breaking despite his best efforts to stay calm. "Hey, sweetheart, can you hear me?" The girl didn't respond. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular breaths. Derek reached out, his hand trembling so badly he could barely control it, and touched her shoulder. She was warm, his breath hitched. Relief and terror flooded through him in equal measure. "She's alive," he said, his voice thick. "She's alive." Behind him, someone gasped. Someone else started crying. Derek leaned closer, pressing 2 fingers to the side of her neck, feeling for a pulse. It was there, faint, thready, but there. Her skin was cool to the touch, but not cold. Not yet. "She's breathing," he said, louder now, needing everyone to hear, needing it to be real. "She's breathing," Blaze barked, sharp, triumphant, the sound of a job well done. And for the first time in 2 days, Derek felt something other than dread. He felt hope. The paramedics arrived within minutes, but it felt like hours. Derek stayed with the girl, wedged into the narrow cavity, his hand on her shoulder, whispering to her, even though he didn't know if she could hear him. Her breathing was shallow, each breath a struggle, her chest barely rising. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, with a faint bluish tinge around her lips that made Derek's stomach clench with fear. "You're going to be okay," he whispered. "We've got you. You're safe now. Just hold on. Just hold on a little longer." Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. "What's her name?" one of the paramedics asked, as they carefully maneuvered into the cavity, bringing a backboard and a cervical collar. The medic was a woman in her 30s, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, her movements efficient and practiced. "I don't know," Derek said, his throat tight. The medic nodded, not questioning further. "We need to immobilize her spine before we move her. Can you hold her head steady?" Derek nodded, gently cupping the girl's head in his hands. Her hair was soft despite the grime, tangled but fine. She was so small, so fragile. The medics worked quickly, sliding the cervical collar around her neck, strapping her to the backboard with thick nylon straps. Every movement was careful, deliberate, designed to minimize further injury. But even with all their care, the girl whimpered, a soft, broken sound that made Derek's eyes sting with tears he refused to shed. "It's okay," he whispered. "We're almost done. You're almost out." They lifted her from the cavity, passing her through the opening in the wall like a piece of precious cargo. Torres and Chen helped guide the backboard, their faces grim and pale. Once she was clear, they laid her on a stretcher, strapping an oxygen mask over her face. Her eyes were closed, her body limp as a rag doll. One of the medics, a younger man with a blonde buzz cut, checked her vitals, his fingers on her wrist, his eyes on his watch. He called out numbers that Derek didn't understand, but knew weren't good. "Pulse is weak and rapid," the medic said. "Respiration shallow, possible smoke inhalation, severe dehydration, hypothermia. Core temperature is 89 degrees. We need to move. Now." Hypothermia. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Derek knew what it meant. He'd seen it before in homeless people pulled from the cold, in hikers lost in the mountains. When your core temperature dropped below 95 degrees, your body started shutting down. Below 90, you were in severe danger. Below 85, you were dying. She was at 89. "Will she make it?" Derek asked, but his voice was barely a whisper. The medics didn't answer. They were already moving, wheeling the stretcher toward the door, their movements quick and synchronized. Derek followed, Blaze at his side. The hallway was crowded now. Firefighters, cleanup crew, building inspectors, all pressed against the walls to make room for the stretcher. Their faces were shocked, pale, some streaked with tears. No one spoke. Outside, the ambulance was waiting, its lights flashing in the gray afternoon light. The sky was overcast, heavy with clouds that threatened rain. The air was cold, biting, carrying the smell of wet pavement and exhaust fumes. The medics loaded the girl inside, working quickly, their voices clipped and professional. Derek watched through the open doors as they hooked her up to monitors, started an IV, wrapped her in heated blankets. Her face was so small, so pale against the white sheets. "Is she going to make it?" Derek asked again, louder this time, needing an answer. The female medic looked at him, her expression unreadable. "We're doing everything we can." It wasn't an answer, it was a deflection. The doors closed. The ambulance pulled away, its siren wailing, the sound cutting through the afternoon air like a knife. Derek stood on the sidewalk, watching it disappear around the corner, his body numb despite the cold. His hands were shaking. His chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a band around it and was pulling it tighter and tighter. Gray appeared beside him, his face grim, his eyes red-rimmed. "The building inspector found the access point," he said quietly. "There's a service shaft that runs the length of the building. It was sealed off back in the 70s during a renovation, bricked over and drywalled, but the fire must have weakened the wall. She probably crawled in there during the blaze, trying to escape the smoke. And no one checked it." Derek's voice was raw, edged with anger. "We did a full sweep. We had thermal imaging. We did a head count. We did everything by the book," Gray said, his voice heavy with guilt. "Thermal imaging, head count, every apartment, every hallway, every closet. Everyone was accounted for. Except her," Derek said bitterly. Gray didn't respond. What could he say? They'd followed procedure, they'd done everything right, and they'd still missed her. Derek looked down at Blaze, who was sitting calmly now, his tongue lolling out, his tail thumping softly against the pavement. The dog looked up at him with those amber eyes, and Derek saw something there, understanding maybe, or forgiveness. "He knew," Derek said softly. "He knew she was in there." Gray nodded slowly. "Yeah, he did." For a long moment, they stood in silence. Around them, the city continued its rhythm. Cars passing, people walking, life moving forward. But for Derek, everything had stopped. "Who is she?" he finally asked. Gray pulled out a small notebook, flipping through pages covered in neat handwriting. "Her name's Emma Chen, 6 years old. She was visiting her grandmother in Unit 3B, the apartment next door. When the fire started, she got separated in the chaos. Her grandmother thought she'd gone down the stairs with the other residents. By the time they realized she was missing, the building was fully involved. We searched, but..." He trailed off. "But you didn't find her," Derek finished. "No," Gray said quietly. "We didn't." Derek closed his eyes. The image of Emma's pale face burned into his mind. 6 years old, trapped for 2 days in a narrow, dark space, alone and terrified, and they'd walked right past her, multiple times. "Her grandmother's at the hospital," Gray said. "Mrs. Helen Chen. She's been there since the fire, waiting for news. The police told her Emma was missing, presumed..." He didn't finish the sentence. "Presumed dead." "She's not dead," Derek said fiercely. "She's alive. For now," Gray said, and the unspoken words hung between them. But for how long? The hospital called 3 hours later. Derek was back at the firehouse, sitting in the common room, a cup of coffee going cold in his hands. He hadn't touched it, couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emma's face, heard that faint whimper of pain as they'd moved her. Blaze was curled at his feet, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes were open, alert, watching Derek with concern. When Derek's phone rang, he nearly dropped it in his haste to answer. "Hello, Captain Hale? This is Dr. Sarah Martinez from Oregon Health and Science University Hospital. I'm calling about Emma Chen." Derek's heart stopped. "Is she..." "She's stable," Dr. Martinez said quickly. "Critical but stable. We've got her in the pediatric ICU. She's severely dehydrated and malnourished. Her core temperature when she arrived was 87 degrees, which puts her in severe hypothermia range. We've been warming her slowly. Too fast and we risk cardiac arrest. She also has significant smoke inhalation damage to her lungs, and we're monitoring for pneumonia and infection." Derek's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the phone. "But she's going to make it." A pause. The next 24 hours are critical. If she can maintain stable vitals, if we can get her temperature back to normal without complications, if her lungs don't develop a secondary infection, then yes, I think she has a good chance. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was hope. Can I see her? Derek asked. Family only right now, Dr. Martinez said, but her grandmother specifically asked about the firefighter who found her. She wants to meet you. Derek swallowed hard. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He stood, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the door. Blaze jumped up immediately, falling into step beside him. Where are you going? Captain Williams called from his office. Hospital, Derek said. I need to see her. Williams nodded, understanding in his eyes. Take your time. And Hale. Derek turned. You did good today. You and Blaze. You saved that little girl's life. Derek nodded, his throat too tight to speak, and pushed through the door into the cold afternoon air. Oregon Health and Science University Hospital sat on a hill overlooking the city, a sprawling complex of modern buildings connected by sky bridges and tunnels. Derek parked in the visitor lot and took the elevator to the 5th floor, Blaze at his side. Normally dogs weren't allowed in hospitals, but Blaze wore his service vest, bright red with reflective strips and a patch that read Fire Investigation K9, and no one questioned them. The pediatric ICU was quiet, the lights dimmed, the air heavy with the smell of antiseptic and the soft beeping of monitors. A nurse at the desk looked up as Derek approached. I'm here to see Emma Chen, he said. I'm Captain Derek Hale, Portland Fire. I'm the one who found her. The nurse's expression softened. Room 512. Her grandmother's with her. I'll let her know you're here. Derek nodded and walked down the hallway, his boots silent on the polished floor. Blaze walked beside him, his movements calm and measured, sensing the solemnity of the place. Room 512 was at the end of the hall. The door was open, and Derek could see inside. Medical equipment, monitors, a small figure in the bed surrounded by wires and tubes. An elderly woman sat in a chair beside the bed, her hands clasped in her lap, her face lined with worry and exhaustion. She looked up as Derek entered, and her eyes filled with tears. You're the one, she said, her voice trembling. You're the one who found her. Derek nodded, suddenly unsure what to say. The woman stood, moving with the careful slowness of age, and crossed to him. She took his hands in hers. Her skin was soft, papery, warm. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for not giving up. Derek's vision blurred. I didn't. It was my dog. He's the one who heard her. The woman looked down at Blaze, who sat perfectly still, his tail wagging slowly. She released Derek's hands and knelt, slowly, painfully, in front of the dog. She cupped his face in her hands, and Blaze licked her cheek gently. Thank you, she whispered to the dog. Thank you for finding my Emma. Derek helped her stand, then turned to look at the bed. Emma was barely visible beneath the blankets and equipment. An IV line ran into her arm. Electrodes were stuck to her chest, connected to monitors that beeped softly in the quiet room. An oxygen mask covered her face, but her chest rose and fell in steady, even breaths. She was alive. Derek moved closer, his footsteps careful, not wanting to disturb her. Her face was still pale, but there was color in her cheeks now, a faint pink that hadn't been there before. Her hair had been washed, the tangles combed out, and it lay in soft waves against the white pillow. They say she was conscious for a while after you found her, the grandmother, Mrs. Chen, said softly. Before she went into shock, she kept saying, the dog. She said she heard a dog barking, and she knew someone was coming for her. Derek's throat tightened. He reached out, gently touching Emma's hand where it lay on the blanket. Her fingers were small, delicate, the nails bitten short. She's strong, Dr. Martinez said, appearing in the doorway. She was younger than Derek had expected from her voice on the phone, maybe late 30s with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and intelligent brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Most adults wouldn't have survived what she went through. But children, they're resilient in ways that constantly surprise us. How long was she trapped? Derek asked. Based on the timeline, approximately 46 hours, Dr. Martinez said. She survived on nothing but the air in that space, and whatever moisture she could get from condensation on the walls. Her body went into a kind of hibernation, slowing her metabolism, conserving energy. It's extremely rare, but it happens, usually in cases of extreme trauma or hypothermia. Will she? Derek couldn't finish the question. Recover? Dr. Martinez finished gently. Physically, yes. We're monitoring her lungs and kidneys, but barring any complications, I expect a full recovery. Psychologically, she hesitated. That will take time. She experienced severe trauma, but she's young. With support, with therapy, she'll heal. Derek nodded, relief washing through him in waves so strong they made him dizzy. So you should know, Dr. Martinez continued, that without your intervention she wouldn't have lasted another 12 hours. Her body was shutting down. You saved her life. Blaze saved her life, Derek corrected, his hand resting on the dog's head. Dr. Martinez smiled. Then Blaze is a hero. Derek visited Emma 3 more times over the next week. Each time she was a little stronger. The oxygen mask came off. The IV lines were reduced. Color returned to her face. On the 4th visit, she was awake. Derek knocked softly on the doorframe, and Emma's eyes, large and dark and filled with a wariness that broke his heart, turned toward him. "Hi," Derek said, stepping into the room. "I'm Derek. I'm the firefighter who found you." Emma studied him for a long moment, her expression serious. Then she nodded. "Grandma told me." "How are you feeling?" "Tired," Emma said. Her voice was soft, raspy from the damage to her throat, "and my chest hurts." "That'll get better," Derek said gently. "The doctors are taking good care of you." Emma nodded again, then her eyes shifted past him. "Where's the dog?" Derek smiled. "He's outside. Hospital rules. But I can bring him to the window if you want." Emma's face lit up, the first real emotion Derek had seen from her. "Yes, please." Derek stepped out into the hallway, where Blaze was waiting patiently. He led the dog to the window of Emma's room, lifting Blaze up slightly so his front paws rested on the sill. Inside, Emma's face transformed. She pressed her hands against the glass, her smile wide and genuine. Blaze's tail wagged furiously, and he let out a soft woof. Derek watched them, the girl and the dog, separated by glass but connected by something deeper, by survival, by hope. "He heard me," Emma said softly when Derek came back inside. "When I was in the wall. I heard him barking, and I tried to knock louder so he'd know I was there." Derek's vision blurred again. "He heard you," he said. "He knew exactly where you were." Emma looked at him, her dark eyes solemn. "I thought no one was coming." Derek knelt beside the bed, bringing himself to her eye level. "We always come," he said. "Sometimes it takes us a while, sometimes we mess up, but we never stop looking." Emma nodded, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. Derek stayed with her for another hour, talking about nothing important. Cartoons she liked, books she'd read, her favorite subject in school, art. By the time he left, Emma was smiling, and the wariness in her eyes had dimmed just a little. In the hallway, Mrs. Chen was waiting. She hugged Derek tightly, her small frame surprisingly strong. "You gave her back to me," she whispered. "I'll never be able to repay you." "You don't need to," Derek said. "Just love her. That's all she needs." The investigation into the fire revealed that the building's electrical system had been faulty for years. The landlord had ignored multiple warnings from city inspectors, multiple violations cited in official reports. The wiring was decades old, frayed and exposed in places, a disaster waiting to happen. When it finally did, the fire spread with terrifying speed, consuming the building from the inside out. The city condemned the structure. The residents were relocated to temporary housing, while the city worked with various agencies to find them permanent homes. Maria Ortega and her children moved in with relatives in Salem. Other families were placed in subsidized apartments across the city. Emma and her grandmother were given temporary housing in a small apartment near the hospital, close enough that Emma could continue her follow-up treatments and therapy sessions. The Red Cross provided furniture, clothes, basic necessities. The community rallied, donating money, toys, books. Derek followed the case closely. He checked in with Mrs. Chen regularly, visited Emma twice more as she recovered. The girl was stronger each time he saw her, the color back in her face, the light returning to her eyes. The fire department held a small ceremony 3 weeks after the rescue. They gathered in the apparatus bay, firefighters in dress uniforms, the brass gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Captain Williams gave a speech about bravery, about dedication, about the bond between humans and animals. Then he called Derek and Blaze to the front. "It is my honor," Williams said, his voice echoing through the bay, "to present this Medal of Valor to Captain Derek Hale and Fire Investigation K9 Blaze for their exceptional courage and dedication in the rescue of Emma Chen." The medal was heavy, brass with a red ribbon, engraved with Blaze's name and the date of the rescue. Derek clipped it to Blaze's collar, and the dog sat perfectly still, his tail wagging slowly, as if he understood the significance. The gathered firefighters applauded. Some were crying. Derek looked down at Blaze, at this dog who'd been discarded, who'd been deemed not good enough, who'd been given a second chance and had proven everyone wrong. "Good boy," he whispered, his voice thick. "Such a good boy." Blaze's tail wagged faster, but the real reward came a month later. Derek was at the firehouse washing the engine when he heard a voice behind him. "Excuse me?" He turned, water dripping from his hands. It was Emma. She was standing in the open bay door, her grandmother beside her, holding her hand. Emma looked healthy now, her cheeks full, her eyes bright, her hair shining in the afternoon sun. She was wearing a purple jacket and holding a small paper bag. "Emma," Derek said, smiling, "it's so good to see you." "I wanted to say thank you," Emma said, her voice still soft but stronger than before. "You don't have to. And I made something." She held out the bag, her eyes hopeful. "For Blaze." Derek took it, glancing inside. There were homemade dog treats, bone-shaped, dusted with flour, clearly made with care. "I helped Grandma make them," Emma said proudly. "She said dogs like peanut butter, so we put lots in." Derek's throat tightened. He knelt down, bringing himself to her level. "He's going to love these. Can I give him one?" Emma asked. "Of course." Derek called Blaze over. The dog trotted out from the back room, his tail wagging, and immediately went to Emma. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his fur, and Blaze stood perfectly still, accepting her embrace. "Thank you," Emma whispered into the dog's fur, her voice muffled. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Blaze's tail wagged gently. Emma pulled back, reaching into the bag for a treat. She held it out, and Blaze took it delicately from her hand, crunching it with obvious enjoyment. Derek watched them, his chest aching with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Pride, maybe, or gratitude, or something deeper, something that didn't have a word. Mrs. Chen stepped forward, her eyes glistening with tears. "We're moving," she said, "to a new apartment, a better place, and Emma's going back to school next week." "That's wonderful," Derek said, and he meant it. "She draws pictures of Blaze," Mrs. Chen continued, smiling. "Every day, our refrigerator is covered with them." Emma nodded enthusiastically. "I'm going to be a firefighter when I grow up," she announced, "and I'm going to have a dog just like Blaze." Derek smiled, his vision blurring. "I think you'd make an excellent firefighter." They stayed for another 20 minutes. Emma gave Blaze the rest of the treats, one by one, giggling each time he crunched them. She showed Derek her drawings, dozens of pictures of a German shepherd with a medal on his collar, standing next to a stick figure with Captain Derek written underneath. When they finally left, Emma hugged Blaze one more time, then turned to Derek and hugged him too. Her arms were small but strong, and she held on tight. "Thank you," she whispered again. Derek hugged her back, his eyes burning. "You're welcome, sweetheart. You're so welcome." Later, after they'd gone, Derek sat on the bench outside the firehouse, Blaze at his feet. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of rain. The sky was streaked with orange and pink as the sun set behind the hills. The city hummed around them, traffic, voices, life continuing in its endless rhythm. Derek scratched Blaze behind the ears, and the dog leaned into his hand, eyes half closed in contentment. "You did good, boy," Derek said softly. "You did real good." Blaze's tail thumped against the concrete. Derek thought about all the lives they'd saved over the years, all the fires they'd fought, all the moments when everything hung in the balance, when the difference between life and death came down to seconds, to decisions, to instinct. He thought about the knock in the wall, the sound that shouldn't have been there, the sound that no one else had heard. And he thought about Emma, alive and safe and dreaming of becoming a firefighter, because one dog had refused to move on. Sometimes the world moves too fast. The fire is extinguished, the smoke clears, the reports are filed, the building is declared safe or condemned, the residents are relocated, the investigation concludes. Life continues, relentless in its forward momentum, leaving behind only charred memories and insurance claims. Everyone moves on. But sometimes, just sometimes, there's a sound, a knock, a whisper, something so faint, so easily dismissed that most people never hear it. Or if they do, they rationalize it away. Pipes expanding, the building settling, the wind, rats. Nothing important, nothing worth investigating. But sometimes those sounds are everything. And sometimes the only one who hears them, the only one who refuses to ignore them, who refuses to accept the easy explanations, is a dog. Blaze didn't understand the concept of giving up. The idea was foreign to him, incomprehensible. He didn't know about procedures or protocols, about risk assessments or liability concerns. He only knew that something was wrong, that someone needed help, and he wouldn't stop until someone listened. That instinct, that absolute unwavering refusal to ignore what others had missed, saved a life. Emma Chen grew up. She went back to school where she struggled at first with crowds and loud noises, where nightmares sometimes pulled her from sleep. But she had therapy and support and a grandmother who loved her fiercely. She made friends. She learned to laugh again, to trust again, to feel safe again. She excelled in school, particularly in art and science. She drew pictures constantly of dogs, of firefighters, of acts of heroism, both real and imagined. Her teachers said she had a gift, a way of capturing emotion on paper that was rare in someone so young. And every year, on the anniversary of the fire, she visited Derek and Blaze. She brought treats, always homemade, always with peanut butter. She brought drawings. She brought hugs and gratitude and a reminder of why the work mattered. By the time Emma turned 16, Blaze was old. His muzzle had gone grey, his movements slow and stiff. The arthritis in his hind leg, the injury that had ended his first career, had worsened. He could no longer accompany Derek into the field, but he was still Blaze, still alert, still watching. Emma came to visit on a Saturday afternoon in spring, the air warm and fragrant with cherry blossoms. She was taller now, almost as tall as Derek, with her grandmother's strong features and her own quiet strength. She knelt beside Blaze, who was lying in the sun outside the firehouse, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, just as she had 10 years earlier. "Thank you," she whispered, just as she always did. "Thank you for hearing me." Blaze's tail thumped weakly against the concrete. Derek watched them, his throat tight. 10 years, a decade of life that Emma wouldn't have had if Blaze had walked away from that wall, if he'd listened when Derek called him off, if he'd accepted the easy answer. "I got accepted," Emma said, looking up at Derek with shining eyes. "To the fire academy. I start in the fall." Derek's vision blurred. "Emma, that's incredible. I'm going to be just like you," she said. "I'm going to help people. And when I graduate, I'm going to get a dog, a rescue dog, just like Blaze." Derek couldn't speak. He nodded, blinking hard against the tears. Emma stayed for an hour. She sat in the sun with Blaze, talking to him about her plans, her dreams, her gratitude. When she finally stood to leave, she hugged Derek tightly. "I wouldn't be here without you," she said. "Without both of you. You fought to survive," Derek said. "We just helped you keep fighting." Emma smiled, and there was something in her eyes, a determination, a fire that Derek recognized. She was going to be an incredible firefighter. After she left, Derek sat beside Blaze in the fading afternoon light. The dog's breathing was slow and steady, peaceful. His eyes were closed, his body relaxed in the warm sun. "We did good, didn't we, boy?" Derek said softly, his hand resting on Blaze's head. Blaze's tail thumped once, and Derek thought about all the people who'd said the dog wasn't worth it. Too old, too injured, past his prime. Better to put him down and get a younger dog, a healthier dog, a dog without baggage. But they'd been wrong, because Blaze had proven that worth isn't measured in speed or strength. It's measured in heart, in determination, in the refusal to give up when giving up would be easier. It's measured in the lives you save, not because you have to, but because you can't do anything else. 3 years later, Derek attended Emma's graduation from the fire academy. She stood on the stage in her dress uniform, her shoulders back, her head high, as the chief pinned her badge to her chest. The audience applauded. Emma's grandmother cried, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. And Derek, sitting in the third row with an empty seat beside him, a seat that should have held Blaze, who'd passed away quietly in his sleep 2 years earlier, felt his heart swell with pride. After the ceremony, Emma found him in the crowd. "He should be here," she said, her eyes red. "He is," Derek said, touching his chest over his heart. "He's always here." Emma nodded, understanding. "I have something for you," Derek said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small brass medal on a red ribbon, Blaze's Medal of Valor. "Derek, I can't—" "Yes, you can," Derek said firmly. "He'd want you to have it, to remind you why you're doing this, to remind you that the smallest voice sometimes needs the loudest defender." Emma took the medal, her hands trembling. She held it carefully, reverently, then slipped it into her pocket, over her heart. "I won't let you down," she said. "You couldn't if you tried," Derek replied. "Sometimes heroes don't wear badges. Sometimes they walk on 4 legs and refuse to be silent when the world tells them to move on. Sometimes they hear what no one else can hear, the faint knock of life against the wall of death, the whisper of hope in the face of despair, and sometimes that hearing changes everything. Blaze saved Emma Chen's life, but in doing so, he saved more than that. He saved her future, her dreams, her potential. Every life she would go on to touch, every person she would help, every fire she would fight, all of it existed because a dog refused to walk away, because he listened, because he cared, because that's what heroes do, not for glory, not for recognition, not for anything except the simple, beautiful truth that life is worth fighting for. Every single time, no matter how faint the knock, no matter how dark the wall, no matter what everyone else says, you fight, you listen, you save. And in saving one, you save countless others. That is the legacy of Blaze. That is the power of refusing to move on. That is the lesson that echoes through time, through fire, through the thin walls that separate life from death. Never stop listening. Never stop fighting. Because sometimes the knock you hear is the only thing standing between a life saved and a life lost, and that makes all the difference.